First Corinthians chapter 9. Last week, as we started working into chapter 8, I told you, and it's important to recognize, that chapter 8 kind of works its way all the way into really chapter 11. Paul has started his argument, and he's going to it's going to feel like digress. It feels like we took a hard left turn. We're talking about something completely unrelated. But with Paul, you kind of got to hold on for dear life and try and just stay with him as he continues to do these things. And so last week, as we got into chapter 8, we talked about what's happening in Corinth is that they are fighting over the reality of whether or not we can eat food that's been dedicated to other idols, right? And many of them have this spiritual knowledge that says, well, all these idols are not really gods, and so there's not really anything on the meat that's going to hurt me, so it'll be fine, we can just eat it. But they're not just doing that, they're telling other people who aren't so sure about it that they should eat it and they need to grow up as Christians, get over it and eat it, right? So it's less about the idol meat as we were talking about and more about the fact that they're dividing one another by trying to either make rules or demand that we have license to do whatever we want. One of the things I joked about last week is that if I was to be a professor teaching 1 Corinthians or Paul in general, one of the assignments I'd love to watch people squirm their way through is to actually write the letter that was written to Paul. We don't know. We don't have that letter. Clearly, though, he's responding to something that they've said to him, right? And so it'd be something like this. Dear supposed apostle, we all possess knowledge as we have in the Spirit to reveal these things to us, and therefore we know that there is no danger in eating food dedicated to idols or partying at the temples because those gods are pretend. They're like the Avengers or cartoon characters. Who are you to speak down to us? You hold no office. You're just a roaming tent maker expressing your opinion. We did not hire you with financial support or contract. Besides, we know that you are of two minds, because you ate such food with us and then declined to eat it with the Jews in our congregation. You clearly doubt your own thoughts on this, so let us help you understand. Something like that is what I imagine they probably said to Paul. It had to be a little bit upsetting just because he responds in a way that sounds like he's a little bit upset, right? So 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 1, he's just going to come at us over and over again with a bunch of rhetorical questions. The answer is yes, right? Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Lord Jesus our Lord? Are not you my workmanship in the Lord? If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you are my seal, the seal of my apostleship. And this is my defense to those who would examine me. Paul is mounting a defense that does not necessarily go where you might expect it. He's going to establish the fact that he has rights, right? This should make some of us perk up because we love rights, right? I've got the right to say whatever I want, and if that doesn't work out, I've got the right to back it up with whatever's on my hip, and if that doesn't work out, I've got the right of working this out in court, right? I've got rights, and they're very important to us, especially Americans. We love our rights, and so did those in Corinth. It's a thing that we say to someone else of saying, you can't do that, right? You can't do that. You're violating my rights. Or the fact that you are violating my rights somehow justifies my reaction to you. Okay, you want to talk rights? Paul says. Let's talk rights. This is my defense to those of you who would examine me. He's already said, am I not an apostle? Have I not actually seen Jesus? This is the claim that he makes as he goes through his Damascus experience and being converted, that he was actually called up to see the ascended Jesus. in person to be given a commandment by him to go and preach to the Gentiles. Have I not seen the Lord? That's one of the requirements of being an apostle. And are you not my workmanship? Have I not founded the church in Corinth? Even if other people think I'm full of it, how could you say anything different of me? You were with me for 18 months as we established this church. This is my defense. Do we not have the right to eat and drink? Talking about the apostles, the ministers. Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas, Aramaic for Peter? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working for a living? Your translation might say something different, if not better. It's not necessarily working for a living as much as working with our hands. Do we not have the right to actually do a hard day's work? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard without eating any of its fruit? Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? I have rights. Let me explain to you why I have rights. I have rights just that come out of common practice. Does a soldier go into war without being paid? Nope. I'd like to see that army sustain itself. We conscript people and force them into that situation, sure. But you're going to have a lot more successful army if they have a future to look forward to on the other side of it. What about vineyards? Am I supposed to actually oversee a whole vineyard and not be able to eat any of the fruit? Or shepherds, they don't get any of the milk and what's happening with them tending to their flocks? These are obvious things out of common practice. I don't have to defend this in a crazy way. Of course I get to eat. Of course I get to be cared for. Of course I get paid for my work. This is my right. And if that's not enough, there's a biblical precept that I can build this up. In verse 8, do I say these things on human authority? Does not the law say the same? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Does he not certainly speak for our sake? It was written for our sake, because the plowman should plow in hope, and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing the crop. He quotes from Deuteronomy 25 and the fact that you don't muzzle the ox. You're going to have a lot more success with a happy ox pulling the plow to make everything work as you're digging everything up. If he's just allowed to just snip a couple of times and grab some grain and snack along the way, you're not going to lose a whole lot in the process, and it's going to make for a happier time as you're doing the work. So the Lord has said in the law to not muzzle the ox because even he should be paid for his work. How much more ought we? If we've sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? If others share this rightful claim on you, do not we even more? There's an obvious intrinsic justice to the world. If I've given you a service, then should you not owe me something else? Do I not have the right to receive this? Nevertheless, he says, we have not made use of this right, but we endure, we put up with anything, rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. You need more examples of why I have a right. Oh, right, okay. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? The Levitical priests were intended to live off of what was brought to the temple. Was it not their right to be able to eat off of this so that they didn't have to go and work another job while they were tending to your sacrifices? Do we need more? How about in verse 14? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. And he didn't say exactly those words. Reminder, when Paul says the Lord, he means Jesus, just in case you missed that part. And in Luke 10, he sends out all of the disciples to go and to spread the good news. And he tells them, don't take anything with you. Why? Because you're going to eat and drink whatever's been given to you, right? Because it is right, he says, it is appropriate, you have the right as a worker to be given a wage. And so Paul says that this principle, this proverb that Jesus says is actually a commandment in the expectation of those who are ministering to the people of God to be able to be sustained by the people of God. I have rights, he says. Now, if most people are writing this, what you now expect to happen is, since I have the right in common just understanding, and since I have the right in the Old Testament law, and since I have the right because of just the intrinsic justice that exists among humanity, and since I have the right because that's how the temple functioned in the Levitical Code, and since I have the right because Jesus said so, you kind of expect him to go, so where's my money? He's building up the case in his defense as an apostle to say, I'm sorry, I'm an apostle. I very much have the right to receive means so that I can sustain myself. That doesn't mean I need a jet like Creflo Dollar. But it does mean that I need to be able to sustain myself off of what's happening. You expect that to be the next thing he says. So help me out. Send some money to me here in Ephesus so that I can be sustained. No, he says, but for the sake of the gospel. But for the sake of the gospel, we will endure, we will put up with anything. There is no limit to the things that I will put up with in order to make sure that I myself am not going to get in the way of the gospel. To not let there be a single stumbling block in front of anybody. To not allow anything in my life or my decision making, even if I have the right to do it, become a hindrance to the gospel. Verse 15, he goes on. But I have made no use of any of these rights, nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision. I'm not writing you for money. That's what you expected me to say. I don't want your money because I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting. What is your ground, your foundation, the place on which you stand for your boasting? You know what I mean? What do you got going on in your life that you're like, at least I got that. Nobody can top me in this, you know? What does high score mean? Did I break it? What is it that you boast in, right? Is it your children? I mean, they're adorable. You know, mine's a little crazy too, but you know, that's pretty good spot. You know, is it your marriage? Is it your wife or your husband? Is it your schooling, right? Your degrees that you might have, or the job that you have? Maybe the amount of money that you have and the ability for you to provide for yourself and for other people. Maybe you boast in our preschool and the ministries that we offer to the world. That's just like, look at this, we're fixing it one bit at a time. Isn't that good? Maybe you boast in the time you spend sacrificially to just love people. Oh, that sounds like a good place to boast. I mean, seriously take the moment to ask yourself, because there's something. Even if you are one of these people in your own mind that are just constantly negative and against yourself to say that I'm not worth anything and therefore have nothing to boast in, that's what you boast in. You've decided that the only good thing about yourself is that you hate yourself, so everybody needs to know about it, right? It's essentially the core of like everything out of hip hop nowadays. It's just like, bruh, we get it. You're sad. Boasting. What are you boasting in? And whatever it is that you're boasting in, would you rather die than give it up? Would you rather die than whatever you're boasting in be taken away? Now, I talk to people about tattoos, right? And we can talk about the biblical reality of tattoos over a cup of coffee. It's not what I'm getting after. But right now, when I just talk pleasantly about what's going on with tattoos, I always say, like, I don't know what in the world I like enough to put on my body forever. Like forever? Like forever, ever? Right? And the thing is that the only thing that I could possibly say in principle of like, yes, all the days of my life, I can get down with that, is Jesus, right? The only thing. The only thing that I know will outlast everything, that will never go out of trend, right? That I'll never be embarrassed by the Tweety on my arm or whatever it might be, right? No matter how it sags or anything else, right? I could see myself being like, nope, that one, right? Now, I don't mean to compare dying to getting a tattoo, but you get my point, right? There's nothing in this world that I'm willing to die for other than the gospel. There's nothing in this world that I cling to so entirely that I would rather die than you to take it away from me other than my Lord. Period. So whatever you're boasting in, are you willing to like die over it? Would you rather die than lose it? And does it have anything to do with Christ? Just let that one simmer for a second. I would rather die, he says, than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting. All right, Paul, what's your ground for boasting? For if I preach the gospel, let's just remind ourselves, what is the gospel? Pop quiz. Anybody? Cam's not here to help you. Yes, those are the gospels. Yes, the books. Good. It is the person and the work of Jesus, right? It is who he is and it is what he has done, right? Everything else I'm about to say is good stuff, I promise, because it's also out of here. But let's hold on to that one. The gospel is the person and the work of Jesus. He says, for if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting. Well, I'm a little surprised, Paul. Really? Evangelizing, preaching the gospel is not what you boast in, not where you find yourself to have meaning, or what you'd rather die than it being taken away? No. For necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. The ground on which I boast is not what I've been compelled, commanded, and forced in some sense against my will to do. That's being obedient. My ground for boasting is not being obedient, he says. Okay, a little surprised by that. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. My boasting is only in what rights I have not demanded, in what rights I have not made full use of, for the sake of the gospel. Yeah, right. Stay with me on this one because about split my brain in half as I was trying to figure it out myself. He says, I have to evangelize, not an option. I've been compelled, right? Something has happened in my relationship with Christ that what has absolutely happened to me is that you have no other choice but to do this. So I will be obedient in doing that, but I do not boast in my obedience. I boast in the excess of sacrifice I do on top of my obedience. That's right. There's the bare minimum of what Christ has commanded and compelled you to do. It may not be pastor a church. I pray that it isn't. No one in their right mind wants to do this. right? If you're doing it because you like it and you want to do it, please stop, right? Something wrong with you, right? And it's only going to hurt the church, right? This is, if y'all remember now over 2.5 years ago when I introduced myself to you in the series, right? I first said, hello, my name is Hidden, because nothing matters about me because I'm hidden with Christ and God. And then what I said the next week was right out of here, we were together in 1 Corinthians 9. And I said, hi, my name is Steward. I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because I have to be. I'm here because I get to be. Because I've been compelled by the love of God, not forced, not scared by hell, not threatened or just offended in some fact that I have no other choice but to do this, but the love of God, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, compels me to. He loves me so much and I love him so much that there's no other way to live my life than the way I'm living it now, right? I don't boast in that. Being a pastor is not grounds for me to boast. The things that are due to me, that I move to the side and sacrifice for the sake of refusing for them to ever be a hindrance to the gospel. That's what I boast in. Paul says, then what is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. If I do it under my own will, I have a reward, he says. But if I do it not of my own will, but under compulsion, I have a stewardship. I don't boast in my stewardship. I'm faithful and obedient to my stewardship. I boast and find my meaning and my reward, my enjoyment and my fulfillment in willfully laying down my rights as an act of worship to my God, refusing to ever allow any part of my life to become a hindrance to the gospel. What is my reward? It's not what I must do, but what I get to do for my master. I get to serve for free, Paul says. I get to give up my rights. My pay as an apostle of Jesus Christ is to not get paid. I remember a couple of weeks ago in Bible study we were talking, and this quote that came to mind from Crazy Love by Francis Chan. I'm going to murder the quote, but you get the point. It's something like, if the way we live as Christians makes sense to the world, we are not doing it right. Paul just said that my pay for being an apostle is not getting paid. Huh? But that's the reality of it. That's what's happening, because I am not going to allow anything to become a hindrance to you, he says. And it could become a hindrance in so many ways, right? Maybe the pastor loves me and serves me just because he gets paid enough. Maybe the only reason he shows up every Sunday morning is because he's getting paid to be here. Or even worse, another hindrance would be, as long as we pay our staff to do things, then we don't have to be the church. These are hindrances to the gospel. Hindrances for us to be called into the same life Paul is living, that yes, acts out a stewardship, but even more so rejoices and boasts in our sacrifices. My pay is not getting paid, not offering any hindrance to the gospel. Because what we're called to do, we were recently in Isaiah in our, as we were reading through the Bible together. If you're keeping up or behind or whatever else, it's a good thing to participate in. In Isaiah 40, we hear these words that you will recognize from the gospel because it's used in reference to what John the Baptist is doing. Isaiah is prophesying for the Lord as they are released from exile, and it says, "A voice cries." It's a voice heard in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground shall become level, the rough places a plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." The ground I boast in is preparing the way for the Lord, making sure that in front of you and every other person I may ever come in front of is that it's not going to be hilly, it's not going to go up, it's not going to dip down into a valley, there's not going to be rocks or roots or anything else for them to trip over that I put there. Because that's what we're called to do. And the remarkable, confusing perhaps, or insane way that we live as continuously more peculiar people in the Spirit is that we level the ground before others to come to the Lord by giving up our rights. I'm an apostle. You owe me money. And I won't take it because I'd rather die than take it. Because I know that it could produce in you and in your community a hindrance to the gospel. Now that makes me consider my life as a person who is sustained by the church. How does it apply for you? Remember, the context here is he's already said in chapter 8, take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. And he says, because sinning against your brother and wounding their conscience when it's weak is sinning against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, Paul says, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Get out of the way. Make way for the King. Prepare the way of the Lord. What do you boast in? For I am free from all, Paul says. I'm free from everybody. I've made myself a servant, though, to all of them, that I might win more of them. See, if you pay me, now I've got to give all of my attention here. And if you don't pay me, I get to go wherever I need to go to spend the time with the people I need to spend my time with as I continue through my missions of the entire European and Middle East, it's not the word I wanted, Mediterranean, that'll work, in order to proclaim the gospel, right? It's a hindrance to the gospel because it might confuse you in why I'm doing it. It's a hindrance to the gospel because I can't stay in Corinth. I've got to go to Ephesus. And I can't stay in Ephesus. I've got to make my way back to Antioch. And I can't stay in Antioch because I've got to get out to Rome. And I can't stay in Rome because one day I'm making it to Spain. I am free from everybody, Paul says, so that I may enslave myself to everybody. See, this is a freedom I do not have. Because I cannot enslave myself to other churches because I've enslaved myself to you. And the pastor that doesn't see his leadership in that light needs to walk away. And certainly has no business receiving $1. To the Jews, Paul says, I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. There's some Greek wordplay, another nerdy thing to do over a cup of coffee one day. But he says, then to the weak, I become weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. One of the commentators that I read said, Paul could not modify the gospel itself according to the particular characteristics of his hearers. The whole of his concern is to make clear that the changeless gospel empowers him to be free to change his stance. The gospel does not change, period. If it starts to look another color or start to take another shape, it is not only another gospel, it is no gospel, Paul says in Galatians. It is no gospel at all. This is the line drawn that we will not cross. I stand for the gospel and the gospel alone, because Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And he is the gospel. He is unchanging. The gospel doesn't change, Paul says. But so that you might hear me better in expressing the gospel to you, I will allow myself to change within the bounds of what is right and what is scriptural. Right? I joked with Dina this morning. It's the reason that I'm wearing boots. It felt right for this morning. I'm not a boots guy, right? This is a confession. It's growing on me. I'm not going to lie, right? But just confession time, right? I'm the guy that likes a hymn book and an organ and a robe, right? You know what I mean? Like all the things that make you kind of gag, right? I love it. Love it. I know what everything means. It's a representation, a visualization of something that's true, and I love it, right? But I know if I walked in here in a robe, never mind a suit and tie, I'd get up here and all you would hear is wah, 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 wah. That's all you get, right? This is what Paul's talking about. He's not saying that therefore when I'm around drunks, I'm going to get drunk, and when I'm around adulterers, I'm going to commit adultery, right? So that I can communicate the gospel to potheads, I'm going to smoke weed. No. Right? No, what I'm going to do is all the things that do not matter to me, right? And Paul's the Jew of Jews. Paul's the Pharisee of Pharisees. No, but you can't get more Jewish than Paul, right? And he understands his own reality as a Pharisee of such meaninglessness that he's willing to put it over there while he comes to talk to me, because I don't understand that stuff. Right. It is bringing down barriers and stumbling blocks for the gospel. It is the thing that I boast in, Paul says, right? Do I like jazz? Sure, but I'm not going to listen to it because you don't like it. It's fine. There are things I've spent my whole life doing, playing video games or whatever else, that means nothing to me. And if it at any point becomes a stumbling block for anybody to the gospel, it's gone. I have the right to play it. I have the right to eat it. I have the right to go. I have the right to just go and hang out at this concert, knowing exactly what nonsense words are about to come out of that man's mouth. But the second it becomes a stumbling block to you, it's gone. And that, Paul says, is what I boast in. That's not the thing that I'm being obedient in. That's the thing that I'm sacrificing. That's the thing that I've done out of my own willful desire to please my God and to uphold the gospel. He says, I do it all, verse 23, for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in it. Or your translation might say, in its blessings. It's not there. The word blessings isn't there. They're helping you understand what's happening if your translation does that. They're helping you understand that he's not saying that I do it for the sake of proclaiming the gospel so that I can participate in proclaiming the gospel. No. He's saying I do it for the sake of the gospel so that I can have a place, an inheritance, a reward, a promise, a presence in my life in it. Right? I run the race not for you, but for me. I read this. I fall on my knees in prayer. I come here every week not because I got paid for it, but because I love him. I do it for me so that I may have the opportunity to participate in the promised reality of heaven. Freedom means enslavement to all for Paul. This is the reason that as we've been going through the series, I've been telling you about the other-centered life. I run in such a way that I don't leave behind me nor cause beside me anybody to ever fall. If it means I got to slow down, if it means I've got to give that up, even though in my own conviction this thing is not a problem, it's gone. And it doesn't matter if you're my best friend, you're my mama, a church member, or a person I've never met in my life. Gone. I do it not for you, but I do it for my own participation in the love and redemption of God. I do it as an act of my own clinging to his cross. I mean, what separates you from those around you? You know, cultural markers and clothing, food. He talks about the weak. Right? These aren't like weak in faith. These are probably some sort of socioeconomic class, right? Does your constant yearning and chasing after having more things, getting a better promotion, making more money, does it at all offer a stumbling block for another person who's going to see, that's how I need to do it? And therefore somehow prevent or get in the way of them and the gospel. Paul says, I'll be as poor as they come. That's not going to be a stumbling block for anybody. It might be something that causes humility in others. There's plenty of those that write to Paul and are ashamed that he's getting beaten and thrown into prison. And that's one of the things he addresses in the book of Philippians. Unfortunately, a commentator wrote, freedom too often is abused in the direction of self-interest rather than expressed in terms of concern for others and the progress of the gospel. He says, I do it for the sake of the gospel. Get out of the way. I do it so that I might share with them in its blessing. I want to share in the gospel. No obstacles, no rights, no divisions. I do it all. For you? Nope. For my example to you? Nope. For my own participation in the salvific work of God? Yes. Not because I can earn it, not because I can justify it. I definitely will never deserve it, but I desire only to honor it and enjoy it. Do you not know, he says in verse 24, that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control. In Greek, it's literally, I'm hitting myself. I'm beating myself, right? Lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. One of the things that was particular about Corinth is they had their own Olympics kind of thing. It's called the Isthmus Games. It was a little less than 9 miles away from the city of Corinth, and Paul more than likely would have been there during its 2-year rotation in the spring of 51, right? And they had running, racing and wrestling and jumping and boxing and javelin and throwing discus, right? And he's using this image that they know to say they're chasing after a perishable crown. They're after a trophy that is worthless. You and I are after much more than that. We're after not just a trophy, but the fulfillment and the participation of what we see to come. Because of what Christ has done, heaven is here. It's no longer this blip of a light that we can barely perceive at the end of the tunnel. I can see it in full view, though I'm not there yet. It's that fun word I taught you, eschatology. It's seeing what will be clearly now. And if I keep my view on it, if I keep myself sustaining on it, how much easier is it for me to run? How much more willing am I to sacrifice and leave behind anything else that might cause anyone to stumble from joining me there? Plato wrote at some point of Olympians, and we assume that it's probably true of the Isthmus Games, that you could actually be disqualified leading up to the Olympics if you didn't participate in 10 months of training. You had to work up for it. You had to be prepared for it. If you weren't going to spend your time really working hard, then we don't want you to compete. Go home. You're going to cause the games to suffer. It's not going to be as fun to watch because you're going to get your butt kicked. But the other way to get disqualified in a race is just to reach out your foot and trip the other person you're running against. You don't get to win after doing that. You don't even get to play. And it's what happens anyways if you run aimlessly. It may just not be something about your life or something you leave behind. It may be you. If we're all supposed to be running that direction and you've decided Jesus is over here, you're probably going to take a couple of people out on your way over there. Jesus said, it is better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and fling yourself into the sea than cause a little one to stumble. And in case you don't know, that's a really, really big rock. You're not going to tread water with that thing. It is better for that to happen to you than for you to cause another person to stumble. I do this. I discipline my body and I keep it under control, lest after preaching to others and being faithful to what I'm obedient in, I become disqualified. Wait, Alex, are you suggesting that we can lose our salvation? I'm not. But Paul just did. And he'll back that up in chapter 10 later. Another good conversation over a cup of coffee, probably. Here's the hard part. I know you're worn out, I am too. Here's the hard part. Paul is not directly teaching you. What we have just read is Paul's own application of exemplifying what it means to follow Christ. He didn't say to you, here's how you do it, step 1 and step 2. And I'm not going to give you a 3-point sermon where all the words either rhyme or start with the same letter so that you can follow along quickly and be like, these are the steps I need to take in my life. Paul is exemplifying the Christian life to us. I heard Shane say a number of months ago in preaching a sermon, I think he did about Abraham, about the reality of if you want to participate in the blessing of God, you've got to be obedient. That the blessing that we have as Christians is tied to our obedience, right? The thing that you are compelled to be and to do. but reward comes from voluntary sacrifice. That's right. Above and beyond. This is what I have to do. This is what I get to do. For me, I'm compelled to serve as a pastor, to steward Paul's gospel, to steward Scripture in rightly dividing it, in preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And my blessing, my being with God, comes in my obedience to my master. But my reward comes in my laying down the rights that I have to be respected, to be supported, to make no demand on how my family ought to be cared for. I lay down my rights in the midst of the political unrest and brokenness and abuse that exists within my church. That one was hard for me. Sometimes I find myself picking it back up and I'm like, nope, put that down. Because I'm only going to add to the division. I'm only going to cause you to stumble if I'm going to point my finger at them and be like, look what they did. Because a Christian's not against anything. We're so radically for one thing. I ain't got time for nothing else. I'm compelled to be a husband to my wife and a father to my children, obedience and blessing, but my reward comes in not demanding my rights in my own home, of how you're going to speak to me, of how you're going to speak to one another. Are you willing to apply this difficult teaching? May we come to the table and be encouraged to do just that together. The table that we gather around each and every week to celebrate and to remember that Christ was obedient to the Father. And he says in John 10 that it is the reason the Father loves him, that he was obedient to lay down his own life. And he has led us to relinquish our rights. The sinless Son of God, who became our sin so that we might be his righteousness. The one that Paul says in Philippians that has equality with God and does not consider it to be something to be grasped and to be taken advantage of, but rather lays it down and humbles himself even to the point of becoming like me, and even beyond it, to dying the worst of our death, deserving none of it. I can't think of a greater right to want to hold on to than my purity and my perfection and my righteousness, my innocence. And he lays it down. So that you and I might finally have even ground to run our race. This is why Hebrews 12 says that we are to run without anything holding you back. Leave sin and everything else behind, fixing your eyes on the author and the perfecter of your faith, Jesus Christ. By laying down your rights and boasting in the reward of it.